everybody so much for coming. I am absolutely delighted to be here. And again, thank you so much, Ali, for asking me. So I'll be teaching a class called How to Mix Color Like a French Impressionist. If you've ever been worried about muddy colors or things being chalky or feeling that you could achieve richer color, then this is the workshop for you. So basically what I'm doing is bringing the theory of art. I'd like to feel that my contribution is breaking down complex things into user-friendly bits, and then also sharing exercises that don't waste your time, that really work. So I've had about 600 plus happy customers, and literally with this color mixing system, we literally don't deal with color after it. It really is that effective. Can't make the same promise, say, for value or a few other things, but for this color mixing, it's really quite an effective system. So we go through the theory of it. We also do some color mixing exercises where you leave the workshop really having absorbed this system and your color mixing proficiency as you leave. There's also a segment about color harmony, and I'm relating this a lot to the French Impressionists. And it's basically an innovative exercise so you can see for yourself what the color harmonies of the French Impressionists were and how they achieved them. And the take-home message is we can steal all of that and use it in our own paintings. So leaving how to mix color after the workshop, and then also with color harmonies of the French Impressionists and also other time periods. But again, easy to implement, and it can have an immediate impact in our artwork. So I like things like that. As Ali was saying, I wound up growing up in southern France. The connection to southern France is that my father passed away when I was fairly young, and my mother was still a young widow. She had gone to the World's Fair and developed a great interest in other cultures. So strangely enough, there was political and unrest and a lot of civic unrest at that time as well. And that's what led my mother to think, you know, there's got to be something better out there where I can escape all of this. So that's how we wound up in the south of France when I was 9. So splendid childhood. It was very different than it is today. You know, there wasn't the same sense of being very overcrowded, and had a wonderful, wonderful time there. And I go back every year, have rich friendships there. And now, since turning into an artist full time, I go back for to gather inspiration for my collections. So the story with art is I was a kid who always was drawing. And in France, they actually had a fabulous art education in the school system. So I felt very comfortable with art. I was getting good feedback, but since my dad had passed away and my mother said, you will go to college and grad school, I'm not sure how I'm going to pay for it, but you'll figure it out. And these are the expectations. So I didn't quite see how I could do art. So I went to medical school and put on hold for about 30 years all of this incredible passion for art. So I literally grew up in places like you see behind me, picnicking. We would go routinely to spend the day in the Renoir Museum that's in Cagnes-sur-Mer. So I grew up in all these places where the French Impressionists painted and walked. And my mother became a second career artist, which brought me into contact with other Americans who traveled to the south of France to plein air paint. So that love of art was born, but I had to take care of business and I put it on hold. So I mention all of this because I see over and over in so many people this submerged and pushed down desire to do art. And I love to share on people's art journey where we resurrect all of that together. The medical part, I feel, is actually very helpful because it's given me some insight into the psychology of teaching and into people in general. And that allows me to create what I feel is a highly nurturing environment, and also the ability to meet everybody where they are at in their own learning style with their own particular goals and needs. I find that very important, especially now. So that's part of how I came to move from being a physician to an artist. The other part that I feel helps with my painting practice and teaching practice is hopefully the ability to break down complicated subjects into small, chunks, bite-sized chunks that are user-friendly. So in other words, in medical school, you have to, read books like this thick. And so I'm going through a lot of these things, little oppositional defiant in that, you have to prove it to me. And so I feel I have to prove it to you as well, so you can draw your own conclusions. So I'd like to think I'm a little bit like Walter Cronkite used to be. In other words, I'm presenting facts and allowing you to draw your own conclusions, because I think that's the most respectful way. Everyone puts things together on their own, and then that's lasting and effective. I thought also I can do today, I'm trying to make sure and leave at least 15 minutes to do the demo. So today I have one of my favorite subjects. It's actually the same one that's behind me from a different angle. This happens to be the garden where Van Gogh spent a year interned in a hospital. No, I'm not staying in that hospital. It's now a museum. There is still a psychiatric hospital on the grounds, but you just feel his presence, and there's something very special. On one side of the garden, at the right blooming time, are his irises, and that just blew me away. And then on the other side is the lavender that I like to paint. So there's just something going on in this garden that I find deeply inspiring. And my poor art gallery, every single collection, they've got to get some version of this lavender hut. And they're so polite. They're like, oh, yes, here we go again. But it's sort of a touch point for me. And I'm sure we all have them. And one of the other things that I like to share in the teaching is, from a psychological standpoint, is sort of resilience in these little quirks that we need to be artists. I'm sure I could have been talked out of repeating the same thing. There'd be many arguments why I shouldn't, but I hold on to it and proudly, and work very hard to be okay with these, special quirks. It just drives somehow the creative process. And so I defend it. I like to tell the emerging artists program people, because I also like to share my journey and help other artists get to the gallery level if that's what they want to do. And creativity, I think, is very hard to maintain, and it has to be fought for. So I like to give people virtual bats and allow them to very gently pummel the fingers, encroaching fingers, around the creative bubble. In other words, we just have to keep it intact and honor that creative spirit. I think it's really important. Are there any questions by anybody about any of these things before I start to paint?
Yeah, so if you have a question, you can put it into the chat, and I can ask Valerie. We actually have a pretty big group, so I'm going to keep the questions to the chat. So Valerie, do you want me to ask you as you paint, or hold them to the end?
Sure, while I paint is fine. Okay, so I'm just going to switch cameras. I'll just give me 30 seconds to take my beautiful virtual background off and switch cameras onto the canvas. Here we go.
Studio as well.
Okay. Now I'm guessing the color is not the same, but oh well. Everyone can infer that the color is a little bit different. So I like brush strokes, which I call in the French Impressionist style. The way I got to it was when I visited this place. Before I had looked at a lot of Van Gogh works, and I thought, wow, it's kind of exaggerated, but then again, maybe that's why he was where he was, until I got there and I realized, oh my gosh, he's completely nailed it. So what I took from his squiggly, what I call directional brush strokes, is that they convey a sense of the movement that is there. If you're in this garden, there's constantly a gentle breeze. You hear the crickets singing. The sun is beating down on things, so you have a little bit of that wiggly air above things. In other words, movement. And I feel that this type of brush strokes, this directional brush strokes, helps capture it. So that's why I love it for so many of the paintings from Provence. Okay, I also do palette knife and a few other things, but to capture these types of scenes, I love this particular stroke. So that's what I'll be demonstrating today. I call it the lay it down and leave it alone stroke. There's physics involved. In other words, if I just say, only I can do this and here's what you do, that's not helpful at all. So to me, to share it, I have to get into physics. So not complicated physics, but physics of the Oreo cookie. And here's what I mean. If you think of an Oreo cookie, there's a chocolate wafer, then you have the creamy frosting inside, and then chocolate wafer. Let's take one of the chocolate wafers off and put it away. Okay, so now I have chocolate wafer, and I also have creamy frosting. Okay, so it's a little bit like this. If I think of the palette knife as the wafer, and then the creamy frosting is in the middle. So the physics behind this brush stroke, and I'll do it here. What if I smash the wafer against the wall? And I'm not pushing it because I'm allowing the little wad of paint to basically not get squished. Now, as I stroke down, I'm laying down paint, and you see at some point there's no creamy frosting left. So again, thinking of the Oreo cookie with the creamy frosting, put it against the wall and smush it down. There's going to be left a trail of the creamy frosting, and at some point you're out of it. And now I get these little irregular bits that's not what I'm looking for this type of stroke. I'm looking for this rich, creamy frosting. If I wanted to eat it, this is where I put my finger, not down here. Here. So to get what I call the rich, lay it down and leave it alone stroke, favored by Monet, we actually have a video of him painting so you can infer what he's doing. This is what we need to do. So on a brush, what that looks like, okay, so creamy frosting, or now let's switch over to paint. And as I stroke down the canvas, look at that. I'm getting a rich, creamy, Monet-like lay it down, leave it alone stroke, and then it starts to fall apart. So what that really means is that I've got to stop here. So basically, I'm laying down a lot of short strokes until I don't have any left on my brush. Depending on the brush, that's about maybe 3 or 4 strokes, sometimes 2. So that's really the secret. So if you look at it like a game, in other words, the game of how do I fill this canvas, but I'm only allowed to make short strokes that are about maybe an inch long. They can be directional and try to get the energy of the piece. And I have to keep reloading after I lay down 3 strokes. That's the game. And we all can do this.
Valerie, so, I'm sorry to interrupt. What kind of brush do you use?
Okay, great question. I love rosemary brushes. And there's actually a Collymore French Impressionist brush kit. They were very kind in making up a kit for me. I felt that it will keep my clients from running to 5 different stores. And so there is the Collymore French Impressionist brush kit. The brushes that help me make this particular type of style are these longer pointy ones called rigger brushes. So they're longer and pointier, okay? And I favor these. I just love these. Like the size 6 and the size 8 are my sort of go-to brushes for this style of painting. The brush also just includes some good workhorse brushes. For example, this is just a small bristle brush, extra long flat bristle brush. And I use this for drawing the initial items onto the canvas. So usually I'm just using maybe 2 or 3 brushes, and I'll use more if it calls for it. Okay, did that answer the question?
Yes, wonderful, thank you.
And then I should say those Collymore French Impressionist brush kits, you can get them at Rosemary Company and at Rosemary Brushes and Company from England. On American soil, they're one place that distributes them is Wind River Arts in Texas. But if not, Rosemary and Company brushes from England will get it to you in 3 days. Okay.
Pretty good.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and lay down a few of these strokes. Okay, so let me put some of the colors up here just so everyone can see them better. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to try it with this rigger brush. And I like to use a medium. and it's the Safflower Gel Medium by Gamblin. And why do I like to use that? It just extends the paint a little bit. It also holds the texture, and it also imparts a little bit of a sheen to the stroke. And I like all of those things. Also, it's a dryer. Full disclosure, I have a tendency to wait to the last minute to do my shows. And so it's a frantic mess at the end. And so in order to dry those last paintings, it's really helpful to have something that can dry even relatively thick layered strokes like this within maybe 4 days. So that's the other reason that I like this compound.
And Valerie, I remember talking to you before about you're really committed to using like non-toxic materials, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. As a physician and a cancer survivor, and liking people and my clients, I refuse to poison people. So petroleum distillates are neurotoxic. They're actually quite harmful, and you can breathe in the fumes. They aerosolize very easily. We certainly have learned a lot about aerosolization, but for example, every time you swish your brush in Gamsol, you're aerosolizing and you're breathing that in. Wow. So here's my challenge. Petroleum distillates were basically found in the early 1800s. Well, where does that leave Rembrandt, Titian, Velázquez? For hundreds and hundreds of years, artists have obviously been doing just fine without petroleum distillates. So that's what I'm recommending. So I use just simple walnut oil. And then for the drawing, I don't use it for the painting process. And then the industry has responded by having a lot of these low toxicity or no toxicity free items, because clearly I'm not alone in not wanting to poison myself. So they have come out with lower or no toxicity products. And so it really just takes a minimum of research to find out which of your paints are toxic. I'm choosing the ones that aren't or are very low toxicity. I'm a brand ambassador for a couple of companies, and they laugh at me because I'm really a limited palette person. So there's one, the Sennelier brand, was actually trying to have me try out paintings or paints, and I was refusing it because I'm thinking I'm a limited palette person. I believe in it, and I don't want to sort of fall for all these other colors. So I was doing well until he said, this particular Chinese orange was used by Cezanne. And I said, I'll take it. And then also this particular purple, the manganese purple, was apparently a favorite of Monet. So I have recently expanded my palette to try out a couple of those colors.
So Valerie, when you say limited palette, just so that everyone understands, that's you're using just a select number of colors and then you're mixing it into the colors that you want, correct?
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm just using basically, I'm using yellow, red, and blue. I do extend it with a little bit of viridian or phthalo green, just because of the subject matter. In terms of the seas of southern France and also the landscapes just require it. If I'm doing a floral painting, you know, we all have experience where you just need that hit of a brighter floral color. So pinks and azo corals will come into it. So basically limited palette with maybe 1 or 2 add-ons depending on the subject. So that's what I mean by limited palette. By definition, if I'm mixing up 95% of all my colors from 3, doesn't that mean they harmonize? I don't have to worry about any harmony. They are all derivatives of the same parents. So by definition, they harmonize. So the color harmony really comes down to just picking, you know, maybe a few complement pairs seems to be what a lot of the French Impressionists use, as well as artists from other time periods. So pretty easy to do. You just pick them from a chart, use maybe a dominant one and a less dominant one, and then mixing all these colors according to this system that I would love to show everybody, where you leave literally very proficient in color mixing pretty quickly. So let me go ahead and switch the camera and I'll demo a few strokes in the last moments that we have. Okay. And usually there's music, but it'll sound tinny. So let me just work a little bit on the lavender. There's a few darker areas that I haven't put in. So I'm going to go and try to capture those slightly darker value areas to anchor it. And again, keep in mind, this is that Monet purple. Normally, I do mix up my own purple, but just to make it fun and to share, I'm just showing that Monet purple. So it's a little too high chroma, so I'm going to make it a little bluer and dull it down just a little bit. Okay. So just cooling it down. And just really doing it on the undersurface. I'm just thinking of the lavender like a ball that turns, a sphere. And so since the light is coming from above, the shadow is going to be on the bottom. So I'm trying to always capture form to make it turn. Okay. So again, I'm laying them down and leaving it alone and reloading. And using a fairly thick paint once I feel secure about the color. So I'll do it tentatively at first and sort of timidly until I'm sure of the color, and then I can get thicker and lay some color down. Okay. There's another technique that was an aha moment that I would like to share. So let me come back to you on the face camera. There's a technique that I call the Cezanne wall technique that I'm very excited to share because it gives great results and it's easy to teach. So the aha moment came while looking at a specific work by Cezanne. If you can sort of picture some of his backgrounds, let's say a green wall, it's not uniform. If you look at a lot of his backgrounds, there'll be a green chunk, then the next little chunk, he actually called them spots or taches. The next chunk is maybe a little bit bluer. Then another chunk down here is the same green, but a little lighter. Then another one over here is the same green, but with red in it. Same green with blue. You get the drift. So I thought, wow, that's how he's achieving richness of color. Now, how can I make that accessible? How can I do it? Well, here's what I came up with. If I have a mother color of that green, and then I think of babies dancing around the mommy, I just pull off little satellite piles, like let's say 5 or 6 of them. And then I make one related to mommy, but just put a little white. And the other one put a little blue. And the other one maybe neutralize it with a little bit of red, and on and on. So very quickly during your color mixing, you wind up with 7 colors, mom and about 6 babies. How easy is it now to just take your brush, dip it in one, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then dip it in the next one and go and sort of fill in the shapes. So some people like the big spots like Cezanne, other people may not. You can just shrink the pixels or shrink those spots or even airbrush them. But the idea behind it is the same. So it can be used by all of us from, abstract to impressionist to highly realistic. So I call that the Cezanne wall technique. And those are also some of the types of tricks and tips that I share in the workshop. And then we practice them. I know I'm aware of the time, so let me know.
I'm mindful of your time too. So if you want to keep going, please. So.
Okay, so I'll do just a few more, and as I listen for questions, so I'll lay down some more brushwork.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think the brushwork would be great.
Okay. I'm gonna go a little bit darker to just make that stand out a little bit more. I'm also standing back every 4 or 5 strokes. I feel strongly that we're painting 2 paintings. I'm painting the one close up where I see detail, but I'm also painting the one from back across the room, the one where people first see your painting. And so something brings them across the room to have a closer look. So that's the painting that I'm painting when I step back 7 feet, when you see me disappear. And then there's the detail that I'm painting. So it's 2 paintings. I'm actually really trying very hard to make it look really abstract and wild up close, but it all organizes when you step back, and it then becomes very realist. So it's something I'm attempting to do.
I'm also doing it from my computer. I'm kind of stepping back further from the screen and.
Yes. And to me, it's painting loosely really comes down to dropping information. Painting realistically, I'm giving all the information. Painting loosely, I'm dropping information. So then the question comes up, well, what do I drop and how? So that's one of the things that I'm attempting to do, is to try to be clever about what I drop. Highly experimental. It's not like I get it on the first try. I am using a lot of the fundamentals of art, but also there's a huge amount of trial and error where I'm just trying things out and seeing how it looks. I'm not committing too much paint, and then I stand back and I make an assessment. It's either working or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, just like Nike says, then I just have to do something about it right away. And for color, it really is a very short list. Do I have the right color? Do I need to change it to something different? So in other words, another color. Does it need to be lighter, darker? Does it need to be richer, higher chroma? In other words, close to the primaries and secondaries I squeezed out? Or does it have to be neutral? And to neutralize it, I'm adding the complement. That's it. Those are the only questions that I'm asking over and over and over.
Valerie, what is were your source references, like the one on the left, is that a Van Gogh?
Yes.
Monet? Sorry.
No, this is actually one of my paintings.
Oh my God.
I'm so glad you asked, because in every class, someone will say, that's lovely, but can now you give me the photo of that? And I try not to, and I'll tell you why. We're trying to paint loosely. So shouldn't our reality be looseness and not hard line? That's what we're all fighting so hard to get away from. So I figured if I'm providing references that are painted, or now you have the Oilist app, which can take a regular photo and turn it a little bit into wild edges and softness, that's what I'd like to become the reality. So I purposely withhold or try not to offer the photographic reference so that this becomes normal. And then 6 months from now, I plan to trot them out, and I'd like people to say, oh my God, that looks terrible. and you know, this is what we're striving for. So to me,
Valerie, do your students paint from photo reference or like art references like this?
You know, really whatever they want. Yeah. So in my particular course, I offer my PDFs for them. I can't offer other people's because it's, you know, copyright infringement.
Yeah.
But many people do from photographs. I do too. This was from a photograph. This is just my rendering of it. So I'm very permissive. I will help you do whatever you want. So some people draw, some people like to quietly hide that they trace underneath. It's in the underpainting. I'm not going to tell. And I'm here to help people do what they want to do.
Another question came up. How long does it take you to finish such a painting?
That's a great question. Way too long. Yeah, these are many layers, and I would say on average it's 25 to 30 hours. So it's pretty labor intensive, just because the number of brush strokes. This is definitely something for rather compulsive OCD people. I'm not saying that's my diagnosis, but clearly I have to be wired to be able to do this nitpicking detail in layers, no less. So I figured wiring is also part of our painting process. Yeah. This would drive some people crazy, and others, they would love it. Yeah. So those are also things that I try to be sensitive to with clients. No one has to do this. You know, I'll give people a palette knife and they knock this off in like an hour. So each person is wired differently. And I figure we have to listen to that and paint according to who we are and what we want. It has to be joyful. It has to be natural. It's hard to learn how to paint. There's a lot of information. And I don't think we should try to be forcing, you know, square pegs in a round hole.
So another question that came up, I'm just going to read it verbatim. It says, okay. Small marks are effective for foliage and shadow. Do you use a larger brush to block in shapes or in the sky/path?
That's such a great question. Yes. So sometimes you're right. This is going to get really busy. To me, the big contrasts are light, dark, then saturated and neutral, and then busy versus quiet. So when this gets really busy, you're absolutely right. You need a quiet area. So sometimes I'll take a palette knife or a larger brush. That's when I'll bring in the bigger rigger, that rhymes, the bigger rigger, and then paint in a way to not be quite as detailed so that there's a quiet place to rest. So there are all these ways to balance things out, including the intensity of brush strokes. So great question.
Interesting. So, and also like the types of students you take, I'm not an oil painter. I'm barely a painter. Like, do you teach beginners or what's the sweet spot?
I do. Most people have been looking for something for a while, have painted and are searching and couldn't find it. And, you know, I'm happy to say they sort of feel they have a home and they tend to stay. But yes, I do teach raw rookies because honestly, I feel it's a fantastic place to start. You know, you're completely free of all of the head games that a lot of us develop along the way. And you're going straight, I think, to the really good stuff and the good way of learning. So I have seen people really move forward very quickly. You know, when we're psychologically prepared, you know, to try new things and, you know, completely open, I've seen people really move forward very quickly, you know, with this curriculum and this supportive approach, and also really just giving all that you need and not wasting anybody's time. I don't like silly exercise that wastes people's time.
I know this is like a different conversation, but I loved kind of the method that you came up with I guess the perspective of looking at different angles in the painting, and like you went through this exercise like the anchor points.
I'm happy to show that if people
can you? Is that okay? Because I thought that it blew me away.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. So bear with me.
As you switch over, another question came up. It said, would oil pastels be good for this workshop?
You know, I figured everything is problem solving, so we'll problem solve it all together.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I mainly am doing oil, but I'll take on a challenge. If you're, you know, if people are willing to do something different than the rest of the class, and, you know, the fact that I'm also making it up, then if you're fine with that, I'm fine to explore and help out.
Oh, cool.
So I'm going to just show what I call nail the scale.
That's it.
I'll explain why I developed it. I think this one is going to give a better result. Select all. Okay, so first I'm going to explain why I developed it. So let's say someone asks you to come and teach 40 donors to a museum, 90% of whom have never touched a brush, and they have to leave feeling like they've really done something. And you've got 2.5 hours after cocktails. So I figured, wow, I better think of something quick. So that's when I was thinking of nail the scale. In other words, how to get everybody to get the basics on quickly. So here's what I came up with, and I'll narrate or talk while through it. Okay. So if I ignore all this detail and just think of this mountain as a big triangle, the only important points are really where these important lines go off the page. So I'm just putting dots down. It couldn't get easier, but I do have to put them in the right space. This is where we're nitpicking positions of the dots. Okay, and now the boat is an important part of this composition. It's really the focal point. So I need to get this one in the page, again, just with dots. So imagine if I get this wrong, it's very easy to erase a dot. Now guess what? I just connect the lines. I literally connect the dots. So very simple shapes. This is 2 triangles and a band. Triangle, triangle, and a band. Now I'm going inside the complex shape. Now I'm going inside the complex shape and finding more detail. So it's almost as if my canvas is now this shape. Complex line. I'll spend some time getting this just right. And now detail. which is the trees on top. So detail. So more detail in the sky. And that's it. So that's nail to scale. That's nail to scale technique.
I love it as a starting off point, because oftentimes when I'm starting any sort of project, right, I get overwhelmed with like the enormity of it.
Yes.
And I love how it just starts off with, okay, like, you know, simple lines that frame it, and then within, and then you start from there.
Exactly. And the psychological link to it, and I talk when I do demos, as soon as I start feeling, oh my God, this is hard, or overwhelming, and I do voice it because I feel it helps my clients if they know I'm quietly freaking out inside, because we all have it. So I'll say, you know, on my own reference, I mean, you know, I'll say I'm feeling pressure because I know everybody wants me to get it perfect. And I'm trying to resist that and do a painting and take my time, even if it's slower than people would like. But also, anytime I'm feeling something is difficult, I immediately go back to this concept, a dot. Let me place this one dot incredibly well. And now let me go to the next dot. And so that gets one through very large scale paintings where it's so complex that you often lose your spot. So as soon as one feels flooded and that sense of something being difficult, I immediately go to easy, because that keeps the joy of painting. You're more likely to be effective painting, and it gives results.
I think that's I kind of want to use that as a life philosophy as well. I think it goes beyond painting, and would think, you know, just start easy, and then
Yes.
Otherwise it gets overwhelming. All right, so one last question.
Yes.
It says, for things such as mountains, water, sky, do you paint a base color and then strokes?
Okay, I love that question. So basically, to tone or not to tone. I like to say I tone if there's a good reason for it. So for example, if I'm painting a Van Dyck type, you know, old Holland still life where the background is completely dark, yeah, then it makes sense. You know, maybe I'll put some warm color that maybe can glow through the dark. It makes sense. When I'm painting these scenes from southern France, the sunlight in Provence is so incredibly strong. So to get a sense of luminosity, I need personally the optic white of the canvas to help project all that light. So when I'm painting southern France, I don't tone for that reason. For other subjects, I will tone if I don't need that brightness to pop the colors forward for me. The second part of that is I tend to lay down higher chroma colors first. I'm a wee worker, so maybe not for much longer, but I'm a wee worker for many years. And so I paint literally in the open spaces because the best lighting is in the lobby where the elevators come. So I'm there painting with earphones in. And so it's fascinating. Watch people come by and they see the first part, which is pretty loud, and you can see in their face, they're thinking it's loud. And I've trained myself, you know, not to care so I can enjoy it. And then they come back later and are amazed that the colors are now muted and much more subtle. So that's also part of the process, is to put the chroma down first so it shines through whatever else I do. And then I tone it down. It's also psychologically, it's kind of fun because you get to be in your face and get the big color in. And then later, you know, we can tone things down, use all of the information. But it allows us to honor both parts of ourselves.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Valerie. So just want to remind everyone, for those who joined late, Valerie's teaching a workshop at PAL. It's August 22nd. I'm putting the link right now to the registration in the chat. And Valerie also has a wonderful website. It's valeriecollymore.com. And you spell Collymore, Collymore.
That's correct.
Yes, or you can just Google your name and your website will pop up. And I think you do a great job talking more about your process and your artwork. And it's we're so excited to have you, and thank you for your morning, Valerie. And I know everyone, you got great responses in the chats. Everyone thanks you and gave you a round of applause. So
thank you so much, everyone. I so appreciate it. Thank you very much, and happy painting. Happy painting. And I hope to see many of you in the workshop.